Hi, everyone. Just wanted to send a follow-up note of gratitude and thanks for joining us last Monday, December 16th, 2024, for the virtual launch of Suffer. So many of you joined, and we had such a rich conversation that several have reached out and said, do we have it recorded? And for those who haven't made it, they were also inquiring. And so sending this recording compilation for those who want to review some of the things we discussed and those who hadn't had a chance to join us. Big shout out to Brittany Smith, colleague of mine from Clare House, who has helped help us to put it together and to host the actual event. So without further ado, I'm actually going to reread the excerpt from Suffer that we introduced the launch event with, so that you get the full picture of where the conversation really left off, and it will be followed by the discussion we had last Monday. For those of you curious about what's happening next, there'll be several in-person events. Look on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and even the website for those events. First one I can think of off the top of my head is January 11th, which is at the Big Om Retreat, a yoga retreat in Oklahoma. And then my colleagues at Magic City Books and I are working together with Tracy Spears, a colleague of mine, expert in leadership, who will be hosting a in-person book signing sometime in Tulsa. So we'll let you guys know when that occurs. Okay. So this excerpt comes from the first part of the book under the subtitle Suffering and Self-Actualization. Suffering ends when we stop fearing things we can't avoid. Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist. Suffering, approached from the lens of need satisfaction, gives a fresh context and significance to Maslow's renowned hierarchy. First, as I see it, needs are expressions of the fundamental laws of our existence and are the ultimate motivating force for optimal development. Mortality, knowing one day we will die, underpins the need for safety. Duality, the inherent oppositions required for anything to exist, reflects our need for connection. Change, the child of time and space, manifests as the need for esteem. Paradox, the consequence of duality, coupled with change, harkens the need for exploration. Interconnectivity, the inherent intermingling of all things, signals the need for intimacy. And creativity, humanity's great calling, is expressed in our need for purpose. For optimal evolution, these laws and their reflective needs are non-negotiables. As Maslow believed, we are primarily motivated by dissatisfaction, and each of our needs, when unsatisfied, is associated with, quote, its own distinct worldview. According to Maslow, needs are like a series of concentric circles, one embedded in the other. He goes on to describe this embeddedness as needs arranging themselves in hierarchies of prepotency. That is to say, the appearance of one need usually rests on the prior satisfaction of another, more prepotent need. To simply demonstrate, the need for physical safety is represented by the largest circle as the most prepotent need on which all other needs rest. As we grow, the prepotency of needs are sufficiently met, the other more nuanced needs open to support our developmental trajectory. Maslow called this opening of a new need as emergence. He says, as for the concept of emergence of a new need after satisfaction of the prepotent need, this emergence is not sudden, salutatory phenomenon, but rather a gradual emergence by slow degrees from nothingness. For instance, if prepotent need A is satisfied only 10%, the need B may not be visible at all. However, as this need A becomes satisfied 25%, need B may emerge 5%. As need A becomes satisfied 75%, need B may emerge 50%, and so on. These characteristics of prepotent embeddedness and gradual emergence create the strife we seemingly feel as we develop. It feels like we're constantly taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Remember adolescence? This herky-jerky feeling of typically eases as we mature, and that we build what matters frustration tolerance, wherein someone who experienced a prior satisfaction of a need is more tolerant to the future suffering of that need going unmet. Regardless of the course, when needs emerge and are adequately satisfied, we develop. Our experience can support this development or frustrate it. And at any given time or in any various context, all needs are signaling for our attention. Second, while we are able to attend to multiple needs simultaneously, it has been my experience that more personal, intimate aspect of suffering typically reflects our most unmet prepotent need. Again, quoting Maslow, everyday conscious desires are to be regarded as symptoms, as surface indicators of more basic needs. If we were to take these superficial desires at their face value, we would find ourselves in a state of complete confusion that could never be resolved, since we would be dealing seriously with symptoms rather than what lay behind the symptoms. And as Kaufman states, the greater the deficiency of these needs, the more we distort reality to fit our expectations and treat others in accordance with their usefulness in helping us satisfy our most deficient need. In caring for seriously ill patients across various settings and populations, I've distinct worldviews of unmet needs manifest as consistent yet personal patterns of suffering. Each time I sit at the bedside, I'm awestruck by the clarity that a new diagnosis or prognosis can bring to a person's life. When the noise of everyday existence vanishes for those few moments, patients and their families reveal what matters most. And with it, a personal suffering often accompanies the experience of this new information and its potentiality of threat. Most commonly, the first pattern of suffering, fear, presents itself when one is confronted with one's own mortality and the threat of safety. However, fear is sadly frequently coupled with the suffering of shame. In an attempt to find some reason or sense of connection and control, people often assume they somehow are to blame or are deserved, forcing the tension found in the dualities that form the basis of human experience. I also bear witness to the grief and loss that come from the inevitability of change and our willful ignorance to deny it. This is further compounded by the complexities of paradox and the suffering of judgment, the most common response to having to hold 2 conflicting truths simultaneously. Further, the intimacies of interconnectivity of all things can elicit isolation when the smallness of life is so evident, and the wave-like power of creativity frequently leaves us suffering, longing in its wakes of ebbs and flows. The triangular relationship of evolutionary laws, human needs, and the patterns of suffering appear to have carved deep neural pathways of great evolutionary benefit. The scientific, philosophical, and religious traditions seemingly agree on this too, as the myths, parables, and archetypes all point to these foundational elements of our world and their promise of fulfillment. Using these patterns of suffering, fear, shame, ignorance, judgment, isolation, and longing, afforded me the more nuanced language to bravely name the unwanted, uncontrollable, and unbearable aspects of life, offered me a rudimentary diagnostic pathway to support those living amid an individuated expression of suffering. By further naming suffering with these more shared, tangible human phenomenon, people are often able to muster the courage to step toward, accept, and harness the power of suffering to shape their lives by simply, though not easily, beginning with meeting their most unmet need. Additionally, the satisfaction of needs, stability, belonging, knowledge, curiosity, compassion, and wisdom seem to round out each of the distinct worldviews, serving as a form of wayfinding along our developmental path. If the satisfaction of needs provides the destination points on the map of our lives, then suffering is the compass by which we navigate.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Jen. We'd like to open that this time for questions and thoughts and comments. If you'd like, you can unmute, or you can also put a chat directly or a question directly in the chat, but we would love to hear from you.
And I know this group is not a quiet bunch.
So we have a question from Patrick. What do you make of the apparent connection between suffering and profound artistic expression?
Oh, you're funny. So Patrick, since he's wrangling his kids, so Patrick and I are comrades in arm, I guess. He and I both are faculty at the Institute for Healthcare Excellence. Patrick is the Chief Medical Officer of Dispatch Health and a longtime friend, and makes me think a lot. So this question's great. So one of the things I talk about quite a bit, and one of my friends who's a Stanford trained designer, she might be on here. Her name's Marie Moran. She's a faculty member at the engineering school at TU. She's also got a bachelor's in fine arts and is she draws and paints and all sorts of crazy things. And she told me about this idea of what we call the terrible sublime. It's an artistic expression that basically any artistic expression that deeply reaches us has this paradoxical experience of profound terribleness and profound sublime all mixed together. And I think you can't really touch into that. That terrible is the manifestation of suffering. And so I think those two things go together. One thing that's really interesting, though, is that Elizabeth Gilbert, you guys might know her from like Eat, Pray, Love, but she wrote a book called Big Magic, which is her view of creativity. And she debunks this myth of like the archetype of the suffering artist, like you have to be mentally ill and addicted to substances and all sorts of different things. And she really debunks that myth. And so, and really gets to this point that, there's enough suffering in the world. We don't need to manufacture unnecessary suffering in order to kind of have artistic expression. It's widely available, just like joy and attitude, kind of gratitude, love and awe. It's just a matter of leaning into it in your own life. So that's what I think about that.
Another question from Deborah Whitaker. When did you begin to write the book and how long were you working on it to completion?
Oh, that's a crazy question. So thank you, Deborah, for being here. She's part of our Clare House family and has attended some of the retreats that we've done on this work. I'm not a writer by definition. I'm more of a healer and a teacher, and I had to think of writing as creating a different healing environment. So that's how this kind of came out. As most of you know, I could probably talk my way out of a box, but writing my way out of a box is not my forte. So I, about midway through my career, so I'm about 25 years in, so about 10 years ago, many of my colleagues were asking me to write a book. And I didn't know what I needed to say. I didn't know what I wanted to say. I didn't know what the world needed me to say yet. Started a deep meditation practice. I was introduced, so you guys see Tamara Vessel on there. She's my mentor and was a huge part of my growing up as a physician, and introduced me really to a formal practice of hypnosis that then led into a deep meditation practice that I was on retreat and got walloped over the head with the idea of what the book is. And that was in the summer of 2017. Kind of back to Patrick's question, I fully understood what the artist feels when they get overwhelmed by what Elizabeth Gilbert calls genius. It's an idea that's a living, breathing being that comes in contact with you and says, are you ready for this? Because I need you as a human to bring this into the world. And it was this overwhelming experience. I was up for 24 hours just writing and graphing things and all the stuff that you guys see in the book. And so from July of 2017, I was researching and writing and saw the book on, and teaching and doing all of those things. And then I didn't know the world of publishing, which is crazy. It's a whole world that I've had to learn over this last year. But I found out that traditional publishing requires that you hand over your intellectual property, and I wasn't quite prepared to do so. And I didn't want to do self-publishing because I needed the structure of of the series of editors that's required to write a book, and I needed someone to do copy editing and all of that kind of thing. And so I just kind of let it be and continued to write the book. And on the same retreat that I took in the summer of 2017, I had bookended it with this similar retreat, and was sitting there, and someone bared witness to a conversation I had with a woman I had cared for that happened to be at the retreat. And the woman was just like, I don't know what that was, but I want some of that, kind of like the whole Harry Met Sally thing. And she was asking about the work I was doing, and I told her, and she introduced me to my publisher, and that happened in August of 2017. I started writing this iteration in August of last year, which 23. So it was percolating for 6 years. It took me a year to fully write, almost day to day. And so that's kind of where things stand. So, yeah.
There's a question from Stephen Price regarding most unmet need. Is there an analog in suffering to triage in a physiological sense? Is there any sort of primacy/priority in those unmet needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the way I think about the way the needs works and suffering is that basically, there's two tracks. One, there's our overall developmental archway, right? We are dependent beings longer than any other, kind of species on the planet. That then requires us to move through our basic needs, so safety and connection, in order to move into independence. The next two needs, which are basically esteem and exploration, help us move from independence to interdependence. And then the top needs of intimacy and purpose move us from interdependence to transcendence. And we're moving along this trajectory, but as you know, life happens. And we develop enough, those emergent and potential, kind of prepotent needs get met along the way, but then events occur that then call us back to attend to those most basic needs. And then you open yourself up to more and more tools, you have access to them. But as I know many of you have experienced personally, our highly developed people have most of your basic needs met, and then a tragedy occurs in your life and you're rendered helpless and only have access to meeting your basic fundamental needs of food, water, shelter, and sleep. And so what's happened in our society is, we've not only held on to Maslow's needs in a form of a pyramid, which, by the way, he did not ever develop. I'll let you read that in the book. But we like to flip it, right? We like to spiritually bypass or psychologically bypass our basic needs in favor of, promise and purpose. And it's left people with their, kind of building a house of cards, essentially, because they don't have their safety needs, their connection needs fundamentally met. And, when trouble happens, they get collapsed right down into that. And so we see that over and over again in, kind of the public eye. And so, yeah, there is, everybody's got their most unmet need. Most of the time it's some sort of challenge we had, either in our early life that keeps repeating itself throughout our life, right? And so that prepotency, we learn to fully hit those prepotent measures, and so that a need becomes fully met that then opens the next ones. But the more we ignore our basic needs, the more suffering I think we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
a comment from Patrick Neeland. Flannery O'Connor said that anyone who survived childhood has enough material to write for the rest of his or her life.
Totally. Oh my God, right? You all know that. We all get that rewiring, and that wiring, it's like, we have all these patterns. One of the things that's really powerful that we talk about, particularly in retreats around mortality salience, as people are going through the dying process, one of the biggest things that happens is a life review. It's a profound act that we hold space for people who are experiencing that. Where, we have the euphemism of life flashes before my eyes, right? And what people who have died and come back to tell us about that life review is that it's the most intense emotional experience, learning experience of their life. It is I think the judgment that we see in a lot of our kind of wisdom and religious traditions. But it's not filled with judgment. It's actually filled with curiosity. You're wrapped in benevolent love. Many people, particularly children, will tell you that the angels sit next to them as they undergo this life review. And it's about going back in our histories and taking the parts of our spirit that were left in our past. The Native Americans call that shards work. Like, I'm gonna go get my shards. And we call them shards on purpose because it's painful to bring those back into our world. But that's what happens in life review, is that not only we see the experience of our life unfold in a way that is from our viewpoint, but we actually get to see the emotions and the experience of what it was like to receive us as an experience. So we get to see the 360 of an interaction. And so, a lot of the work that we do and what I encourage people to do and what I've learned from my patients is that don't wait, do your shards work now. The wholeness that you will feel after the pain of retrieval is worth it. And so that's my hope, is that, this book encourages people to find the safe space and lean into their suffering in a way that doesn't wait until life's end to do that work. Because that's the biggest message I think I've received, and feel, kind of obligated on behalf of the patients I've cared for to extend to everyone. So, hey, Brittany, I'm getting texts from people asking to come back in. I don't know if there's anybody in the waiting room. Perfect. What else?
There's a question from Clark Wigley. What is your path forward with this work?
Hey, friend. So Clark is another work colleague. Clark and I were longtime pals here in Tulsa, but then had the privilege of working in Africa during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is a period of time in my life I will always cherish. So thank you for that. So to my developmental editor, in my very first meeting with her, was said, this is not one book. So all the things that had been percolating, as Deborah asked earlier, over the 7 years, is actually going to be likely. I mean, you have no idea. With the creative process, you can only guess, right? That it's actually going to be spelled out in 4 books. So suffer a little bit of a, what is the thing? What's a forewarning? I can't, what's spoiler alert. I was like, what's the word? Suffer is the first book that lays out a series called Suffer, Choose, Create, Die. And so right now, that's how the series of books will lay out, and it will go into a deep dive into each one of those things, kind of similar to suffering, in that there will be science and spirituality and philosophy all wrapped into one. As my revisions editor said, she's like, it's like literary academia. She's like, that's the only word I can describe it. So yeah, it takes each one of the parts of the compass and really breaks it apart in doing a deep dive. So there's that writing. I'm hoping to do kind of cycles of 2 years, write, publish over the next decade, with probably more intimate retreats. I've already done a couple of speaking engagements and it's landed real well with people. But the intimacy of those conversations seem to really affect people in a way that they're able to embrace their own sufferings pretty much straight away. And so my hope is to kind of create those kind of spaces that complement the work of the book. So thanks for asking.
There's a question from Kathy Clark. Do you see a shift in society to have a better understanding and embracing the beauty in suffering?
Yeah, so hey, Kathy, like Deborah, is part of our Clark House family and part of the yogic family in the region here in Oklahoma. So it's funny you asked that question because I can't remember. I just had a conversation with somebody about this. So the work I feel like happens with people, particularly as we mature and become experts in our fields. There's the kind of interactions we have with the one-to-one, right? And then we have, kind of the interactions we have with systems. So if there's a singularity interaction, then there's system interaction, and then there's societal interaction. And really, in the book, I call it naming the water. What is the water that our culture, particularly in the United States, swimming in that, people are unwilling to, not only they live in this, kind of, unfortunately, are suffering ignorance, which is they don't see their own suffering and so therefore can't see the suffering of other people. And so we're walking around as an ignorant society because we're largely very, very disconnected from each other. The basic need for connection and belonging really sets us up for a lack of self-awareness and full known self-esteem. So we're kind of the blind leading the blind. And as we get better at helping people not be ashamed of meeting their basic fundamental needs, I think we'll see an improvement in society. The data behind that really is from a guy by the name of Wilkerson. He's out of the United Kingdom, who looked at what is the relationship between money and health when it comes to nations. So if you look at GDP relative to health outcomes, and what he demonstrated is that the worst health outcomes here in the US and the Western world is associated with the deep, deep, deep gap between the haves and the have-nots. So the more income inequity we have, the less healthy as a nation we are. So until as a society we are able to embrace our own suffering, either from overconsumption or not having enough, and helping more people move towards, kind of the Buddhist middle way, I think, we'll continue. If we've got to make a decision, are we going to continue to grow further apart or are we going to come closer together? And I think suffering is one of those places that we could potentially do that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The question from Tamara Vessel is witnessing suffering an active or passive act? Should we teach clinicians a different way to deal with suffering?
Of course you would ask that question, my friend. I think it's an active, I think we're swimming in it, right? I think it's part of our water. Becoming more aware of it, I think, there's a little bit of passivity until there's a tipping point of, where it becomes, you become aware of it. Kind of the cartoon I always talk about with naming the water is, there's the old fish swimming with the two young fish. The old fish says to the two young fish, "Hey boys, how's the water this morning?" Two young fish are like looking at each other, and the one fish says to the other, "What the hell is water?" And when someone points it out to you, that's what our mentors are for, is to help us see the things we can't see because we're just too immature, right? So there's a passivity in it until someone actively points it out to us, right? Gives this to us, and then it becomes an active choice. I think it's the one real active free will that we have, is to say, what is the water of my life? What is the suffering of my life? And so then it becomes an active process. And I think my hope is that this framework helps clinicians to not only see their suffering and become more aware and less ignorant of their own suffering so that then they can hold others with compassion and be of service to that, allow people to be fully felt and fully seen until we feel that in our own body and in our own minds and in our own souls. We can't offer that to others. So my hope is the framework gives people a way to do that. I'm going to read this, Brittany, because it's classic Patrick. I was laughing at the part of the book where you said something like, we meet our suffering by doing yoga or something similar to that. At the same time, I've seen people, including patients, leverage a lifestyle change to move forward. How do you approach the balance of physical and nutritional well-being, which is obviously important with the other nourishment of the soul, right? Yeah, there's a really interesting woman, a social scientist by the name of Ruth Whitman, who wrote an article about, kind of where were we when the pyramid was collapsing, I think is what the quote is, and we were a yoga class. It's a great article if you want to understand how people bypass basic needs and, kind of if I find the purpose of my life, right, if I do enough yoga and stand on my head, all my world's problems will go away. So I think that, it was done tongue in cheek, but it's so true. I mean, when you look at, kind of the diseases that we deal with today, they're diseases of lifestyle choices. I mean, 80 to 90%, depending on the statistics you look at, of medicine that we deal with today has everything to do with multitasking, overconsumption, and profound judgment. It's our lifestyle choices. It's all the social determinants of health, of who we live with, where we live, and how we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. And I think we can't, kind of our soul requires this kind of prepotency in order to reveal itself to us. It's here and present, and people go on this journey looking for it in the worlds of well-being and all the other places, and it's all right here. But it requires that inward look, that honest reflection of, oh my gosh, food, water, shelter, sleep, basic connection. I know where I belong, right? I know that I matter. I mean, when I ask people that question, which is a reflection of the second need, I don't know if I know a single person that's not able to kind of get through that without at least getting verklempt, if not full-blown tears. I mean, how many of you know that you matter in this world, right? And so the more people we can help, feel belonged, I think, the better the nourishment of the soul will come with as we address those basic needs in their appropriate, prepotent fashion. So, and of course, Tracy's got to add that comment. Shout out to Tracy.
You keep saying it though, and it's so not true. So I was trying to get home from a meeting, and like when you said it, I went to say something, and my phone went off, and I was like, "That's it." It's true though.
I appreciate that. I haven't, so shout out to Tracy. As many of you guys know, she's kind of a Tulsa celebrity. She's expert in the world of leadership and was a dear friend in helping me navigate this world and being my big, kind of one of the biggest cheerleaders. And so very, very grateful and has been oftentimes pointing these things out to me. Yeah, it's a weird identity to kind of claim. And I'm getting more and more comfortable with it because, as we talked about earlier, when you have an idea claim you'll do anything and everything to maintain that relationship, and it requires me to be a writer. So I'll claim that. So thank you.
It makes me happy.
I'm just going to say a couple of shout outs to people. So for those of you who don't know and can't tell, Betsy Gahab is my great love, my godmother, and has, kind of been a presence in my life throughout. So very, very grateful for her. I see lots of familiar names. Chrissy Wolf down there is my revisions editor. And so profoundly grateful to her. She had to tolerate all of my as we say in the writing world, shitty rough drafts. So grateful to her.
They were not shitty. And it was a joy. It was a joy. And I apologize, no camera, but it's been a running day today.
Oh, I'm just so glad that you're here.
I enjoyed working with you. It was amazing. You did a great job.
Thank you. So many of you friends and family, I can't believe you're here. So I really appreciate the time and effort that you took to get here and to help when I had so many questions across the years that I have shared with each and every one of you. So thank you for being here. Brittany, anything else? Any other questions? Anybody has comments?
Jen, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for being. So if suffering creates a growth, life growth, on some level, it's important, right, to suffer or witness suffering or be part of the suffering world. Should the goal of medicine is to decrease suffering or pay attention to some types of suffering and not the other, or create an interventions, right? Because what you are saying is some of it is a very personal growth.
Yeah.
That we should not potentially interfere with.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of what we do is about our own suffering. I think we can't handle it. We can't watch it. We can't see it. And so therefore that unbearable, unwanted, uncontrollable aspect of suffering is left. This person requires connection, requires a container by which they feel safe in order to process that. And I actually think that is the goal of medicine, is to be able to create the compassionate safety, that basic need, need for physical safety and psychological safety, so that they can enter into that and take the risk to explore it. I do believe there's unnecessary suffering. I think we impose a lot of that in modern medicine. And so yeah, I agree with what you're saying, is that there's necessary and unnecessary suffering. Who gets to judge that? I don't know. And a lot of the reason why I wrote the book was to help some have some sort of objectivity to it. As I alluded to, you and I both know Eric Cassell before he died, and he and I argued a lot about what that was. And I think this is the component that's really interesting, is being human is to suffer. And I always am asking the question, well, if that's the case, then why? What's the point? And we've been so afraid to lean into that. I think this opens the door to do so. So I think there is that need for us to learn how to be, containers, and to be able to bear witness and help transform, some of the experiences that people necessarily have to undergo in order to grow.
So then the definition of palliative care should change based on that, right? Because it's actually not, the goal of what you are saying is not necessarily alleviate the suffering, but work with suffering.
Transform it.
Yeah.
Oh, sis. You're going to be thinking.
I didn't mean that.
You know that.
You can start tomorrow.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I agree for sure. Thank you. Always.
Thank you.
Okay. I see
You're
Kathy.
beautiful, by the way.
I miss you, my friend. I see Kathy's hands raised.
So a question that's coming to my head with suffering. When we're looking at suffering, are we looking at suffering specifically toward the end of life time frame because so much of our suffering we're bringing with us to the end of life, and it causes us to compound the suffering. And the healthcare professionals have to bear the burden of easing our physical pain, yet society, religions, etc., have done such a great bang-up job throwing the suffering upon us as we've lived through life. Do we see any kind of I don't know, is there more than just the healthcare professionals that we can turn to stop easing and taking care of our problems? Because y'all's shoulders should be like really heavy at this point in time. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I'm going to unpack it in a couple of ways. You know, as we've had a conversation previously, I think that's the biggest lesson that dying people have taught me, is that don't wait, right? We tend to wait for the crisis to give us the space, the excuse, the reason to do the work that we need to, and to walk into our suffering. And we just kind of keep packing things away. And the one thing you'll see, I mean, there are 3 or 4 stories in the book where the ending story is, a patient looking me square in the face, looking through me at some wondrous thing that I'm unable to see, and say, don't wait, don't wait, right? That the work, doing your work in life and not waiting until the moment of death, because it will, all of that work will have to be done at some point. The richness of your life will come to fruition much earlier. And so, I think that's a lot of what the well-being work, kind of that industry is trying to get at. We're starting to see the work of coaches come into play, and people kind of leaning into non-medical others. I can't call them experts because we don't really have a way of talking about that. But I think we're starting to see this whole industry of people, particularly people who are mentor-like, kind of ideas that, we lean into. I think more and more we're looking into communities and leaning into communities more. But we need some, this is a place where things are going to get messy for a while until we figure out those that are able to navigate things and help others through the process. I mean, I'm struggling with my own identity as a clinician. My traditional practice, the traditional medical practice is very physically reductionist and is very dedicated to diseases. And I spend most of my life at the bedside talking about the things that matter most to people. And 95% of it has nothing to do with their bodies or their disease process, and so what does that make me? So I think we've got a lot of role confusion around the need for what traditionally, and if you look into old cultures and old ancient traditions, it's the wisdom, it's the oldest generation that helps guide the rest of us through this experience. Some of you may have heard, I really like the concept of the second adolescence of life. It prepares us, right? It's the transformative process at every single level of us to move us from productivity to mentorship and wisdom. And we've got to figure out a way to harness that power. I mean, arguably the evolutionary, there's an evolutionary argument for grandmothers, which is they are the wisdom tradition. There's a reason why we're pulled out of reproduction, which is a very dangerous thing for a human body. We're pulled out of reproduction to hold the knowledge and the wisdom for the culture, for the group in the community. And so we need to start figuring out how to honor that so that people can reach into that spiritual connection across generations, and receive the love and guidance they need to kind of do that work, throughout their lives versus waiting till the very end. Long question or long answer to a very short question. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're reaching to the top of the hour. I just wanted to spend some time. Susan, oh my gosh, Susan, I'm so glad you're here. Susan was a retreatant that I got to spend some time with, ages ago. God, it feels like a lifetime ago. Wonderful artist. I haven't read more than the beginning of the book yet. Yeah, most people have a hard time getting past those first few chapters. They're pretty intense. I don't want to fool people into this is going to be easy. So I just throw them into the deep end from the beginning. But I'm sure it will be an important read for me. Thanks for bringing it into the world and helping provide resources for us as a community to understand ourselves deeply, and perhaps more importantly, to also help each other home. Already can't wait for Create. I love that. I love that. Thank you very much. That's very sweet, very fitting coming from you, wise woman. So.
Well, I just want to also draw attention to some links that I put in the chat. To write a review is really important for online presence. You can do that through those links. And if you want to purchase additional copies, you can also do that through those links. But thank you so much for talking with us, Dr. Clark. It's always a joy to hear what hear your wisdom, and thank you for sharing your energy with all of us.
Of course. And I think there's one last question. Is love an antidote to suffering? Yes. As I say in the book, love is the container by which all needs arise from. For sure. For sure. A couple other questions. D, he's over at OU doing some really hard work with oncology patients. So I hope you don't mind the question, but it's very interesting. You mentioned the 90%. I'm working on a paper that imagines the positive parts of Western medicine and positive parts of traditional Chinese medicine. Yeah, I mean, we do a bang up job of really helping people through trauma and recognizing kind of basic disease. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's beauty in both of them. I think the further, again, anything that pits things against each other, I think doesn't do any of us good. And the more paradox and welcoming of two truths that happen to be completely conflicting and embracing both of them, I think is really important. So. Okay, everyone, oh my gosh, Amy and Frank, Donna, I mean, all of you being here, this is amazing. Thank you. I'm sure I'll see you kind of over the next couple of weeks. I'll see all of you or talk to you at some point, which is a gorgeous thing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for helping with everything. And I can't wait to see you all soon. Take care, y'all.